Good,
Sorry,
good.
Commissioner Roberts, we were having a spirited conversation about water.
That's funny. I was telling someone the other day when I was younger, I kept asking my mother.
Younger.
But I was a child.
Okay.
And I kept asking my mother for juice, and she said, "You know what you need? You need some H2O." So
Right.
all day, I was like, "I want this H2O. Like, what is
Right.
this H2O?" And she kept saying, like, "You've had it before. Like, it's not a big deal, but you need some." We got to like 6 or 7 o'clock, and I guess she got fed up with me asking, and she said, "Chantal, it's water."
Yeah. That's a wonderful way to teach your kids. Good
Man,
mother.
can you see I'm still hurt? 30 years later, I'm hurt. Okay. Christian, are we waiting for anyone?
No, I believe we can go ahead and get started.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the February 16th Operations Committee meeting. I hope that we're all well and are just as excited as I am about today's agenda. We have a rather full yet exciting agenda for today. So, for my colleagues, I ask that you hold your questions until the end of each presentation so we can get through them. Um, all right, let us get started. First up, we will have the 21st Century School Buildings Program presentation. Will that be you, Ms. Hellman?
That will be me.
Wonderful.
And if
Morning.
you say good morning, if you give me just a few seconds, I will share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, good morning, everyone, Board of Commissioners and City School Associates. My name is Dorothy Hellman. I'm the Executive Director for the 21st Century Programs. Just wanted to point out that normally we would be showing the annual report at this time, but we're still tweaking through a few of the details. So what you're going to see in this winter update is really a few excerpts from the annual report. That report should be coming out at the end of this month, and it should be ready for the board to vote in March. So that's it. If you look to the right of the presentation, that's actually the cover of the annual report that's going to be out in a few weeks. So the agenda is pretty straightforward. We'll touch on the Plan Year 1 and Plan Year 2 schools progress. We'll talk about some project status updates, talk about swing location transportation, touch a little bit on engagement, and spend some time on some special community events that occurred this year. We'll give a brief overview of the student internship, what we have been up to, and then I'll spend some time on the MSA program highlights. Again, some of this is going to be an extraction from the annual report. And then we'll talk about recent and upcoming events, which is really going to be structured around school openings. So where Plan Year 1 is concerned, of the 11 schools that are in Plan Year 1, Patterson Claremont, which co-locates with, both are co-locating at the same location. That final project is going to be completed in September 2021. I want to point out that Claremont is going to, their students are going to move in a year later, only because we still have to demo the existing building that could potentially cause some trauma to the student population. So their occupancy will be delayed for a year approximately. However, both schools will be open. Plan Year 2 progress of the 17 schools in Plan Year 2, 7 are completed. We have 6 that are under construction. Hartford Heights, co-located with Sharp Leadenhall. We have Calverton, Govans, Coleman, Mosher, and Northwood. These are all under construction. 3 are in design, and the last one, Commodore John Rogers, is in feasibility studies. One thing I want to point out from the last quarter is cross country. That was on hold. And I think if you guys can remember, that was due to FEMA and the remapping of the area to a 500-year floodplain. That project is now under feasibility studies, and we anticipate construction will start later on this year in November 2021, and that will be open in September 2023. Project status. Despite COVID, we're still progressing with getting our schools open. If some of you were online just a few weeks ago, we had the grand opening for Lois T. Murray, Walter P. Carter, both co-located at the Walter P. Carter campus, and we also had the grand opening for Medfield Heights as well. The high school. The feasibility studies are included only under the 21st Century Program. The build out is going to be funded under the Build to Learn Act, which is I think recently got passed in a sense, only because Kerwin was vetoed. So the program is in process. The goal is to have 3 options completed for each. The studies kicked off with Frederick Douglass and Briscoe and with City College. We did pause the studies in December to allow for a review of Poly and for Western. So the reason why we took this pause was because it allowed us to look at the portfolio of schools as a group rather than individually. And then this 20,000 square foot view, in a sense, gave us the opportunity to balance the give and take at each school with regards to infrastructure, safety, program requirements, sustainability. Again, just to ensure that the $400 million that we anticipate under the Build to Learn Act, that it would be distributed equitably among the schools and not just have maybe Frederick Douglass and Baltimore City get the bulk of it because they were there first. But again, this is strategic to kind of make sure that everything that we're doing has a lens of equity kind of built into it. The plan is to get all of these studies completed by spring of this year, and these will be the final options will be presented to you, the board, so we can make a final decision as to execution of the program. Swing school status. Currently, we have 8 schools in Swing, Calverton, all the way down through Montebello. 7 of these are actually are going to be receiving yellow bus transportation, with the caveat that school opens later on this year. Just a little bit of a recap, kind of looking back, 3 schools, year 2 schools were completed. They were relocated from their swing space into permanent school locations. Mary E. Rodman, Medfield, and Walter P. Carter. And then 2 schools were also relocated into swing spaces so that they could undergo renovations. That was Highlandtown and Montebello. And their program will be done in August of next year. Transportation. When this was written for presentation to the board, we were anticipating that our students would be back in school in February. That has since been delayed to March. Nevertheless, the transportation department they're continuing to work on their final recommendations for swing space. We continue to work with them, the 21st Century Program, again, because the transportation costs are funded under the 21st Century budget. The team I know is reviewing considerations necessary to keep staff and students safe. Again, just to recap, increase in the amount of buses to take our students back and forwards. Routing students along the shortest route, mandatory face mask. What's new is they're examining the use of privacy curtains in between each of the different seats and possibly in between each of the students, and looking at air purifiers. I know the transportation department is working on this very diligently, and they will release this plan once it's complete through a separate report. The annual report includes a summary of work that we do with interagencies. We do work with Department of DPW, the Housing, DOT. Inspire is one of those programs that we work with. If you look through the annual report when you see it, you'll see some highlights there. But I do want to point out two things that Inspire was able to achieve this year. The first one is Mary E. Rodman, the Recon Parks area, that vacant property next to it that's used as a playing field. We were able to work with Kaboom with hold on for a minute, sorry. There's a few things popping up on my screen. The Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund, the community, the Allendale community members, and of course, students from Mary E. Rodman. And we were able to all work together. They now have play equipment installed in that open green area. The second project that we worked with Inspire on is the mosaic structure celebrating the neighborhood and a community garden over at Fort Worthington, which is one of our earlier schools. This is a part of a growing green initiative being led by the city, and it does help to stabilize the community and to bring the community members together. This too is in the annual report. Sorry about that. Back to community engagement. Again, this is just a recap. Everything that we did March onwards was really just in a virtual platform. We went to GoWebinar. We had 48 virtual meetings, 900 attendees. Meetings are held in Spanish and English. We did a lot of merger activities online between parents, teachers, and the principals. We added some book bags to schools that were merging to build solidarity, and we fostered a relationship with Zeta Pi, who donated 20 Amazon Fire tablets. Deshaya from Joy from Mary E. Rodman is one of the winners. We just wanted to highlight that. Community engagement also includes meeting with elected officials on site, especially those who have concerns about their districts. One such visit was Highlandtown, where we reviewed the proposed addition to the school to address overcrowding and its impact to the limited green area that was being used extensively by the community. So this visit kind of allowed us to be in alignment with the design and to ensure that our improvements received input from the community representatives. Again, some of these things are best explained in person. The walk was attended by Delegate Robin Lewis, Councilwoman Danielle McCrae, Luke Clippinger's office, Senator Bill Ferguson's office, and again, the rest of the design and construction team. Communication special events, and then this is just a little bit of a recap of what occurred this year, an extract from the annual report. The MOU partners held two significant events this year. One was a public forum on February the 6th. The other was a MOU partners retreat that was held just the other day in October. So the public forum was held as a requirement under the MOU, which requires that the executive committee from time to time schedule public forums and provide opportunities for the public to ask questions and get comments back on the 10-year plan. It didn't have a frequency, and because the last one was held 5 years ago, it was a great time to provide an update to the community. The event was very well attended, and we did receive valuable feedback, which is now being incorporated and being looked at as we go through the feasibility studies and through the program. The second one that was held in October, the MOU Partners Retreat, again with 15 out of 28 buildings completed at the time. It was an opportunity not only for the partners, but also for the agencies as well, especially from Baltimore City. Recon Parks, they were able to assess the program with clear lens against the original goals. We toured two buildings. We toured Fort Worthington Elementary, which is one of the first schools that was open. And then we also toured the Reach Partnership, which was the last high school that was built. And we looked at challenges and opportunities. And we are also, again, looking at feedback as to how this can actually help to improve the rest of the programs that we have currently, and also for the high school program. A few of the things we looked at with regards to challenges and opportunities included, sustainability of some of the materials that we've selected. We looked at long-term maintenance with our operations and facilities team at City Schools. We looked at material selections. We talked about community spaces, ease of access for the community to use those spaces that we have designed. We took a look at furniture and finishes, and in light of COVID, we thought that was very important. And then we took a look at offsite work, which quite frankly is not included in under the MOU because of the bond requirement, but definitely something that we thought was a challenge. And because of that, Baltimore City and the MSA is actually working on a separate agreement to address offsite work, especially for pedestrian and vehicular access. So there was some success to having these programs. Internships. I think in the last meeting, I did mention that, again, the program was not held in 2020 due to COVID, but we do have a bit of a good news in that the program at the time last year was not able to kind of move forward in a sense because of some of the funding. They were short on funding. This year, they were able to recoup some of that funding. And so the increased cost of what we thought would have been at around $80,000 or more, that contribution level is now back down to a regular contribution level of $25,000. So it's the additional cost is no longer necessary. We are proceeding with a virtual option this year. Again, 12th grade remote internship and training plan. We have 15 students recruited to date, and whether online or in a combination thereof, we are going to proceed with having this training occurring in the next few weeks. Background checks, very important to what we do. Despite COVID, we continue to screen applicants through appointments at the North Avenue office. We have 7,849 workers fingerprinted to date, 351 not cleared. But one of the things I wanted to point out today is the appeals process that we created last November. Any one of the workers who come in and they go through a background check and they don't pass that check, at that time that they come in for an appointment, they are given notice that if they do fail the background check, that they are able to go through an appeal process. Since then, we had 5 workers who appealed, and of these, 3 were able to obtain reversals, allowing them to be cleared for work. Again, from our perspective, if one person received a job out of this process that we created, we would be happy. We're exceedingly happy because, again, 3 workers were able to go through a process and to be able to gain employment in the city. And for that, I think that it was a good decision to actually create that program. Program highlights. This is, again, is an extract from the 2020 report when you do receive it. I did want to spend a little bit of time on some of the things that the MSA did perform this year. Again, December 31st, 17 out of 28 school buildings completed. Where local hiring is concerned, 948 local hires compared to the 369 positions that were originally anticipated to work with MOED. Over 250 procurement task orders, $1.06 billion issued in contract awards out of the $1.2 billion that is anticipated under the program. $350 million of that was issued for MBE contracts, and that equated to 33.11 participation. That compared to the state, which I think is in the high 20s with regards to their MBE requirements. I also wanted to point out the 3 funding changes that occurred this year. In March of 2020, Highlandtown, the scope and the budget increased from 19.1 to 20.9. Again, this does not include the $6 million that was just approved by the team for renovating the existing building. In July, Commodore John Rogers, the budget and the scope was increased from 21 to 42 million. That is almost double what was projected. And that's because, again, the scope of work has changed. It went from a renovation strategic to systemic. Then we added renovation, modernization portion of it. And now that we've done our due diligence on site, I think there's a few more things that we do need to change on that site in order to make sure that we're building a sustainable school. The last one is cross country. That scope, as you're well aware, was changed from a renovation to a replacement, and that's because of the FEMA 500-year floodplain. That budget also was doubled. The reason why I brought those three up is because recently Governor Hogan in September sent out a broadcast indicating that MSA had a $60 million in savings achieved for future buildings, again, due to project management and bond issuance transactions. But in reality, if you take a look back at what occurred in March, July, and December, you'd say the savings is really around $100 million. So I just wanted to point that out. Again, all this information can be found in the annual report. Recent events. This event is past, again, based on the time that this report was submitted, but nevertheless, it's worthy of mention. It is the first virtual event that we had for Louis T. Murray, Medfield, Walter P. Carter, and that event was held back on January the 27th. So this is where it gets a little bit exciting because we're looking forward to 2021 in just a few months. Despite COVID, the projects are progressing nicely. The MSA has not missed a date with regards to a deliverable in a project. Us internally, the 21st Century team, we're managing the furniture, the finishes, the equipment packages, the IT procurement. We have proactively released all of those for approval to ensure that our supply chain is not impacted by the deliveries that we're going to have this year. We have 6 buildings that we're anticipating between June and August that are going to be delivered, which is really 8 schools because 2 of these are co-located. We start accepting schools in June, Hartford Heights, Sharp Leadenhall, and Louis T. Murray, which is a carryover from December. In July, we anticipate accepting James Mosher and Govans, and in August, Robert Coleman, Calverton, Patterson, which co-locates with Claremont. Again, this is subject to change, but we do think that if we pace the projects accordingly, then staff will be able to kind of manage the closeout of these projects and get our kids into healthy, safe, and whole buildings. So that said, more information will be forthcoming in the coming months, and that's the update for the 21st Century program. Again, I do want to point out that the annual report will be provided shortly, and you'll be able to review some of these items that I discussed this morning.
Thank you so much.
Any questions?
Yes. I'd like to open the floor. Dr. Commissioner Bondima.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hellman. Very good presentation. I have 2 questions that you might have covered it already. When you talk about jobs that were available, local hiring, that's the one. Thank you. When you talk about 948 local hiring, explain to me, and you probably already said it, does that include employees that come through the contractors? What type of jobs are we hiring that's coming as local hiring? What does that include? That's the first question, and I'll go right to the second question. Oh, you can answer that first, and I'll go with the second one because it's not related.
So local hires are those that these are the staff that comes through the regular architects and contractors that are working on site, which is really kind of like executive positions. These are primarily workers through the general contractor or carpenters or electricians or site foremen That's the general staff that's kind of hired through the MSA construction managers and also MOED as well, working with the city.
Okay. I just wanted to know the difference. So this doesn't include when we get contractors to do the work. They bring their own bring their own people, their positions. But this is separate from that. Is that right?
Yeah, when we have contractors, they actually come, or construction managers, they actually come with their project management team. They
Right.
actually come with their site superintendents.
Uh-huh.
Those positions are very different because are very different from these positions that are hired specifically for the work that is being executed on site.
Okay, thank you. And another question, and I don't know if Dr. Washington can answer this or anyone related to community engagement. We have a cross country that's been out of, but the students have been away from that school, I think, what, about 4 years? I was just wondering, it's right smack in the community, and I was wondering, do we continue to have um, meetings and focus groups or conversation with the community? Because it's sitting right in the middle of residential area, and like all the rest of them are. But I'm just saying, are we keeping them abreast of where we are, what we're doing? Because it's been almost 4 years since we actually moved the kids from that school.
Okay. So let me speak to cross country. Not quite 4 years. I think it's actually 2 years.
Oh, is it 2? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's around 2 years that the kids have moved out. And again,
Okay.
it was in 2019, late 2019, early 2020, that we discovered the issue with the FEMA floodplain, and we
Okay.
actually had to pause the project. We
Mhm.
have had discussions with the elected officials of the area. We have had discussions with the principal, and the principal has in some cases relayed that information to the community as to what is happening. We did have community meetings up to the point that we discovered FEMA. That information was relayed. After that, all our communication sort of went through the principal and
Okay.
the educational staff and through the elected officials. Recently, we have began outreaches again to the community because we now have a firm trajectory as to what is occurring with the program and the fact that we have additional budgets to cover the issue with FEMA.
Okay, I just think it would be a good recommendation if, even though we had many people from the system meeting and talking, and the council people, they're doing their job. It would be nice that every so often we could go call a meeting so they can ask us directly. Sometimes they need that to hear straight from our school system.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Fair request.
Commissioner Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hellman, great presentation, was concise and fluid. Thank you very much. I guess in terms of my questions, I guess the first one deals with, we have 17 new schools. That's probably only 10% of the system. But of those 17 new schools, are there any concerns with readiness, preparedness, and ventilation? And I guess my second question is, this is a wish question for me. Is there some way, maybe when we get to be COVID-free, maybe in the fall, that people from this committee could take a tour with you of the new buildings and also the buildings in construction, so we could be, up front and center in terms of the whole 21st century dynamic?
Okay. Absolutely. With regards to the last question that you asked, being able to take a tour, we can absolutely do that. We're always excited to bring folks onto our project sites, and I'm actually used to it. So we can actually show you again and to correlate what we present here and also what's occurring on site. So that's one thing, we can do that post-COVID. The other thing you asked about was school readiness for the 17 schools. Those 17 schools are ready to receive students. We do have VRF systems versus your packaged air handling unit that are installed in our buildings. Those systems actually provide 100% outside makeup air, which is, again, one of those criteria under COVID, kind of making sure that we have a lot of fresh air. And so our buildings are ready. We do have a few punch items in a few buildings. Again, that's kind of normal considering that, and that's a part of the turnover process that was established with the MOU. But our buildings are pretty much ready to go for students, including the 3 buildings that were recently just turned over in December.
Thank you.
Okay.
We have the honor and privilege of having Commissioner McFadden with us this morning, so I want to give him the opportunity to ask any questions if he has any.
Good morning, everyone. No, I don't have any questions. It's just good to see the progress of the 21st Century program coming to fruition. I'm not going to prolong anything, but thank you, Ms. Hellman, for the presentation and your staff, and I just look forward to seeing more of this progress happen over time.
Okay. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ms. Hellman.
Thank you.
We are ready for the transportation update presentation.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Robin. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Thank you for joining.
Yes, yes. Thank you for having me. All right. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I hope my voice is finding everybody in great spirits. My name is Robin Marshall. I'm the Assistant Director of Transportation for City Schools, and I am here to give you the transportation update. On this first slide, this is a framework of what yellow bus services or transportation services look like within city schools. This current snapshot is what it looked like before COVID-19 hit. So MTA, there was approximately 29,000 students who were eligible to use MTA. Our main use of yellow bus transportation is curb-to-curb service, where we transported about 5,000 students between yellow bus and taxi cabs. As far as corner-to-corner and swing space, we transported approximately 2,000 students with each mode, and we also transport students for extracurricular activities like football, special events like field trips, cultural events, and things like that. What that looks like currently, or at the time when this presentation was put together, is the curb population went from about 5,000 students to about 400 plus, a little bit more than 400. So the number of buses that we utilize decreased significantly. We do expect that to increase once in-person learning is expanded, which we are actually excited for. But as of right now, we are currently transporting about 400 students. In regards to our second semester efforts to prepare for the reopening, we decided to keep the bell schedules the same as the virtual environment start times. The purpose of this is to allow school communities to transition as easy as possible. Making them go back to their old bell times would probably cause some issues for not only staff and students, but for just families, how they have their work schedules and everything set up. So we decided to keep those bell schedules the same, just so we can have a minimal adjustment from virtual to in-person learning. Changes to bell schedules will have minimal impact on transportation if the percentages remain around that 20%, what's being estimated. As of right now, it looks like that we're not going to have any issues with overcrowded buses or things like that. But we will be monitoring that as more families opt in for the in-person learning. We are doing a attendance bus tour, in collaboration with the Office of Neighborhoods and Community Engagement. This tour, we're taking city school staff around different neighborhoods in the city to talk to families of city school students to kind of re-engage them and talk to them about bringing their kids back for in-person learning. So that's something that the people who are involved in are very excited about, and just taking that opportunity just to talk to families and then ease their worries as they prepare to send their students back for in-person learning. Ongoing discussions that are happening right now behind the scenes are around air purifiers on the yellow buses. It's looking like we're not going to be able to implement that before the first day of school. So one thing we're doing we are asking drivers to crack the front and back windows just to increase the amount of airflow that's going through the buses as we are traveling. Of course, this is contingent upon weather and other factors, but for the most part, this is something that's going to be done just to increase the airflow so students are constantly getting fresh air. And don't worry, the heat will be on as well. But as I said, if the weather just makes it unrealistic to do, then it will not be done. But on most days, windows will be cracked. Cameras on the yellow buses are another discussion that is going on behind the scenes, as well as a parent reimbursement plan to support social distancing on the bus. This is something that we would implement if we ever got into the scenario where we have more students wanting to come back in person and utilize transportation, and we actually have seats available to transport and social distance. So that is a background plan that we will implement if we ever get to that point, which right now we are not there. Also, surveys went out to parents of not only just swing space and corner-to-corner riders, but just yellow bus riders, period, just to get their input on their comfortability with utilizing yellow bus services, as well as some other questions I was asked on there.
And so, Robin, I just want to jump in. I'm sorry. This is Lynette Washington, the Chief Operating Officer. Robin, if you can go back to the previous slide, I just want to make one flag for the purpose for the board and also for the public. One of the things that Robin talked about is ongoing discussions as it relates to air purifiers. And this was also something that showed up in the 21st Century Office presentation. And one of the things I just want to flag is that this is an ongoing conversation. This is something that is still being considered, and there is review of a balance between making sure our students are safe on the buses and also the cost implications to putting air purifiers on buses. Right now, as we're going into spring and also summer months, there is the ability for students to or for the bus drivers to actually keep windows down. And so that review of air purifiers may definitely change. It was something that was very much heightened during our winter months, where it's very difficult to roll down windows when it's very cold outside. So I just want to make sure that I flag that the air purifiers is definitely something that we are still reviewing. So I don't want us to assume that there is a timeline by which we will be implementing air purifiers on our yellow buses. Sorry about that, Robin. I just wanted to flag that.
Yep, thank you for that. As far as the survey that went out, the question that was asked to families was, first, does your child take the school bus to and from school because you live more than a mile? This question was to gauge how many families are receiving transportation because of distance. The second question was, as an alternative to a school bus, would you be interested in receiving a reimbursement to provide your own transportation for your child to get to and from school? This addresses the parent reimbursement plan that I talked about on the last slide, just to get families' take on if, one, they would want to, and just to estimate, two, if how many families really have the means to do so, right? The last question that was asked is, as an alternative to a school bus, would you be interested in receiving shuttle services for your child to get to and from school? So I didn't cover this in the last slide, but this is another option that we could use for our corner-to-corner and swing space schools. Let's say that our swing space buses can hold, and this is just for number's sake, can hold 10 students per bus, and school A has 2 buses, which means that we can transport 20 students via 2 buses and social distance. But however, school A, the families who attend that school, the families that said yes would make 40 students be eligible for that corner-to-corner and swing space service. Therefore, with 2 buses that can transport a max of 20 students, and we have 40 students, another option that we could implement is to have those 2 buses go to and from the school twice to transport 10 students per bus on that first leg, and then another 10 students per bus on that second leg. So this is another option, and we was asking families, is this something that they would be interested in? Ongoing safety measures for the second semester is, of course, social distancing on the bus. We will also route students to the shortest possible route, and this is in response to the CDC recommendations that people should not be in tight spaces for more than a set period of time. So even though we will be social distancing, we still want to make that ride as short as possible for each route. All buses managed by the Office of Pupil Transportation and contractors will require staff and students to wear face masks. Special considerations may be made if a reasoning for a student not wearing their mask is a manifestation of his or her disability. But in those cases, we will look to see if we can route those students separately. And the Office of Pupil Transportation has submitted a formal request to MSD and MDA to allow for the installation of transit curtains on the yellow buses. And we are still waiting for a response to that request, but that request has been made. Any questions?
Yes, I do have questions. So I have 3 questions actually, and then I'll open it up for the floor. If we could go back to the bell schedules, and while you say that right now, if around 20% returns in terms of maintaining social distance and the other governing hygienic practices now, as we're looking ahead to next school year when we will potentially have more students returning, are there any type of variables being considered in that space right now?
Yeah, so, and just to clarify too, this 20% is concerning this school year. So right now, there is, we are expecting our number of drivers to not be as high as it was before COVID. So we are just trying to plan around driver recruitment and things like that for now. We would have to look at numbers over the summer to see what our actual capacity is for next school year, but this is just concerning the remainder of this current school year.
Got it. I just remember that you all had been talking about the bell schedules and looking at various studies around that for about a year now, and then we we couldn't plan for COVID,
Right.
and so that was just something that bubbled up. Could you just, for a matter of just information, give us a little bit more detail around the parent reimbursement plan?
Sure. So the parent reimbursement plan that we looked at, it's actually a model that we got from the Philadelphia school system, something that they were doing in the beginning of the school year, and they are still doing now. So if we get to the point this school year where just the yellow bus capacity is just lower than what the demand is, we will reach out to families to see if they will be willing to accept this parent reimbursement, which would be approximately $150 per family per month, and in lieu of riding the yellow bus to school just to free up seats. But as long as we have the capacity, we wouldn't even implement this plan at all, but it is set up in the background to run if we ever came into that scenario.
Hi, this is Jacinta. I do want to also we would implement a 95% attendance. So the school would verify that the child had attended at least 95% of the time before we release our reimbursement for that month as well.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Jacinta.
And with the bell schedule, we still are moving towards phase 2, and we have been talking about it, but just COVID kind of paused it some. And so we still would hopefully the following, not this year, but the following school year, when things may be a little more closer to normal, re-engage the conversation of a more standardized bell time that would accommodate transportation.
Got it. Thank you so much. Because for a matter of reference, most of the bell times are within 30 minutes of each other, right?
Yes.
So close together. Got it. And then my next question was about the telephone surveys. Have those already been conducted?
Yes.
Do you have any results that you can give us? Any like the number of participants or the dates or any kind of results that we got from the survey?
So they just went out at the end of last week, so we do not have data to share about those yet.
Got it. If you could just circle back with us when you all start getting your results in, I know that this committee especially would be interested in seeing what those results are. Commissioner Reed?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to get back to your question you asked earlier, Commissioner Roberts. We're going from 35 yellow buses to 105 in this dynamic. I know it's about 6 months away, but that's going to be here pretty quickly. So we're going from 400 kids in yellow buses to maybe back to 8,500 kids. We're going from like 100 kids on MTA to about 29,000. So what's the dynamic, especially, I mean, I've heard a lot about the yellow bus approach. What's our dynamic to be in terms of communicating to parents and children the plan and vision for MTA? Because that's more daunting because it's not something you can control as readily. So when we get back to, hopefully everybody gets vaccinated and we get back to 100% in person in September, how are we going to attack that whole 29,000 kids on MTA?
And so, Robin, Jacinta, I can jump in on this one, and that's a very, very good question, Commissioner Reed. I think that one of the things that we have been doing is working to engage our families, and so we're going to be rescheduling a town hall that we prepared just related to transportation. So it was related to us talking through yellow bus transportation with families, but also MTA. And MTA has actually joined us in a lot of our presentations to talk to families about some of the protocols that they're using on buses. And then other questions that have come up related to this. Also, I've been on a number of different calls, even with some of our youth groups, have been around what happens when those protocols that they say are happening on buses are not happening, right? And it's the same situation that we've been dealing with like before COVID. If MTA is saying that they are sending us a dedicated tripper bus and they're crowded before our students can get on, we would note the route and the time period when our students experienced those things that were against protocol or things that were communicated with us, and we would work with MTA in order to address it. And that, I think, is the same thing that we're going to be doing now. We are aware of MTA's cleaning protocols. We are aware of the fact that masks must be worn on buses. People should not be standing in aisles in order to ensure, more social distancing. And that when those things are not happening, we're telling our families and also students to be able to reach out to the transportation department so that we can reach out to MTA and say, hey, this is a route, or this is the time when we experience this, and we want to know that what are steps that you're taking in order to address this. So that is basically some of the things that we're doing. And also, like I said before, we're rescheduling a transportation town hall in order to get families more information about what's happening with MTA.
Thank you.
Dr. Washington, while I have you, is it possible for you to speak about contract tracing efforts for our MTA riders?
So I can't speak to that. I don't know if Allison is on the call, but that is something that I would definitely have to give a follow-up.
I am actually on the call. Sorry, I was on another call though, so I missed the question. Commissioner Roberts, can you repeat it?
Contract tracing efforts for our MTA bus riders.
Oh, so I believe it's done through the health department. We do contact tracing for any contacts that occur, or any close contacts of COVID cases that occur on our school sites. And so we do that initial tracing to say that it is that who the people are within the school environment that are close contacts, and we share that information with the health department. If there are extended contacts beyond that, say with a family member, then they do that work. On buses, on MTA buses, I believe they would do that work, but I can follow up with them and find out specifically how they do that, and we can get back to you with an answer.
Thank you. I believe that as we are moving closer towards our reopening date, that is something that is still very anxiety driven for some of our community members. And so if we could get any of that information out so they understand that process would be really helpful.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Bondima?
Oh, thank you. No questions. Wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Commissioner McFadden?
Just very briefly, so I appreciate that. How much control do we have with our contractors, our transportation contractors? So I know that there is a fleet that city schools operates, but we do a lot of contracting generally, and that is for our students with disabilities, our homeless students, our English learners, and the like, and then certainly our swing spaces. In that type of transportation. But how much control do we have? Because I saw some of the mitigation strategies being placed into like some of the buses, some of the pictures and things that you all showed. But I know the students are riding taxis, and there are other things that. So how much? And control is a strong word, but how much do we? How much influence do we have over how they operate as they transport our students to and from?
Yeah, and so we do. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. You want to go?
No, I mean, you can go. One of the things I will say is that a lot of our control is based off of the contract that we have and any amendments that we make to the contract. But Robin, definitely go ahead and jump in.
So I was going to say that we do have a lot of control, and our contractors are responsive to our requests, especially if it comes in the form of a complaint. But in the current environment now, I would say our control has increased significantly. One, because there's a lot less work out, and two, if certain things don't happen, then we have a lot more leeway to either one, move routes around, which will decrease individual contractors' monthly income, and we have the ability to take routes away right now. So right now, our control is a lot higher, and the contractors are very responsive to complaints that come into us.
I appreciate that, Mr. Marshall, and certainly Dr. Washington. It was helpful. It makes sense, right? The language in the contract dictates what our relationship is with those contractors. So that's all I really wanted to know, to make sure that our students are being placed in the safest transportation environment as possible, as we can possibly control. And it's clear that a lot of that is outlined in the contract. Thank you. That's all I needed.
No problem.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Of course. We are ready for the budget update.
Hello, good day. Can everyone hear me?
Good morning.
Yes, we can.
And Chief Eldery.
I will attempt to share my screen.
Yep,
So-
we see it.
All right, well, good day, everyone. This is our monthly budget development update. I'm going to get started. My name is Courtney Desabé. I'm the Special Assistant to the Chief Financial Officer. And I'm clicking on the wrong screen. Here we go. So today we're going to go through the updated budget timeline, district priority engagement, the peer student funding updates, enrollment projections, and the charter funding formula. Just as an update, like where we are right now in the timeline is essentially, you know, the crux of the process. So this is where we're actually inputting budgets. Schools have just received access to their budget tools. The grants tool has gone live as well, and Central will be going live today. So all areas will be beginning the process of building and putting their budgets into the actual system. We're about to get into the collaboratives, but before I get into that, we did do an update to the timeline fairly recently. So what we heard and a lot of feedback that we received from school leaders and cabinet, school leaders have a lot going on right now. So we know how busy the budget process is just in general in a normal year. This year in particular, dealing with you know, virtual learning, dealing with going back into school buildings and a lot of other things that are taking place. There were just a lot of things kind of hitting at the exact same time, or you know, taxing the same group of people. So to sort of relieve that burden, we wanted to adjust the timeline to try and add a little more flexibility for school leaders. We adjusted the length of time in which the budget tools will be open, so they have more time to input the information to the tools. We also adjusted the timing for the budget collaborative sessions, which, you know, we've discussed with this committee before. They're pretty intense. We do, you know, 5 sessions at a time. They're all day during this period. 4 sessions at a time. They're all day during this period. And they're pretty intensive for school leaders and the central office staff that are involved. So we wanted to add a little more flexibility there in terms of scheduling. We also added some more time between when schools receive their allocation and when they have to have their community feedback meetings. So before, in the original calendar, they only had about 3 days between when they received their allocations and when the collaboratives would start. We stretched that out to 12 days so that there's more time, again, between when they see what their numbers are and when they have to start the collaboration process, therefore giving them more opportunity or a larger window to meet with their family members and community members before they start the collaboratives. So this was, you know, just like I said, in response to trying to relieve some of the burden on school leaders and the central office staff involved, and just make the process a little smoother, a little easier for everyone involved. So we did update the timeline because of that. The presentation dates and vote dates for the boards will remain the same. The next slide is about our district priority engagement sessions. So if you recall, we had sort of the 4-tiered approach to the community engagement. We had the general audience session, and to be clear, and I know we use the term, you know, priority engagement sessions for a couple different things. Schools have their engagement sessions. This is specific to the district priority engagements. This is the surveys that we've used over the last couple of years, where we've provided an opportunity for community members to give feedback on the items that they want to see in the final central office budget. We've taken, over the last 2 years, we've taken the items that were voted as the top 5 in terms of responses and incorporate them into the final budget. So chiefs present a list this year, I think it was 21 or 22 items and priorities that committee members vote on. So we had some information sessions addressing, you know, separate audiences. The first was the general audience session. One of the beauties of the virtual format that we find ourselves in, for better or ill, is sort of like viewership and the ability to reach out to a greater number of folks. And while it's positive in terms of the number of views, you could see here under the different sessions, like on YouTube, we had ranging from 115 to 119 views. On Facebook, we had from 1,600 to 2,200 views for the different sessions. We sort of It's also a little more difficult to lock people down and to get active responses to the survey. So we had a lot of people attend the meetings, ask questions, give feedback, but we didn't, get like a corresponding spike in the number of responses. So that's something we're kind of figuring out how we want to address going forward. We did leave the window open longer. We have been posting on our social media channels and on the district webpage for responses. But there is a certain value to sort of like having the live meetings or in-person meetings and having people in the room and kind of like, handing them a survey and telling them, hey, could you please fill this out before you leave? I think there's a certain amount of interaction that's lost in the virtual format where folks can kind of like pop in and out of meetings a lot more frequently. But like I said, on the bright side, we really were encouraged by the amount of views that we got and the amount of interaction that we got in terms of people attending the different sessions, particularly with the youth session.
Courtney?
Yes, sir.
I realized after I put my hand up, which was just a few seconds ago, that perhaps you couldn't see it because you're presenting. And after I put my hand up, you did touch on this, but I did want to point out, and I mention it / ask it of the board, because my understanding is that these are really good numbers and really increased numbers. And I'm no expert on, any more than the next average person about the internet, but on these Facebook views of 2,200, 1,600, 1,700, these websites are they're not prone to have kind of accidental or casual visitors. Like they're not landing pages where people will go and while they look for something else. These are highly specific pages for the youth voice session or the community partners session. So these numbers are great. I mean, I have a sense that whether by good luck or good planning or good execution, the numbers of views on these priority engagement sessions are really encouraging and promising. And so you said it all very well and matter of factly, but my impression is that these are wildly higher than they've been in the past. And as I said, maybe it's partly the virtual environment where people are much more used now to getting information online. So maybe there we, in a weird way, we're increasing our engagement and our touches because of this environment that's been thrust on us. But I just the Facebook views are really, really encouraging, and I just wanted to point that out because the whole idea of this, of course, is to get information out, engage with folks in whatever environment is most suited to them and their schedules and their other commitments. And I just didn't want that to be lost. Not that your presentation was making it lost on the group, because it's basically really good news as far as what I can tell.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm remiss, I probably should have included, like a comparison of what the numbers look like in the prior years where we had, 12 to 40 for some of these events. So it is an astronomical improvement in terms of the number of views and the people that we've been able to touch or, get to see and engage on the process. So that is a very good point. So the next few sections are breaking down some of the stuff for that, in building the FY22 budget. So the first thing, of course, is revenue. So we have a, sort of a summary comparison. State revenue is largely flat in terms of general fund dollars. Local revenue, just based on the MOE, maintenance of effort calculation, should go up slightly. So the general fund budget is relatively similar to last year. Where we do see an increase is for the tutoring grant, sort of what we're calling the ESSER 2 grant dollars that can be applied largely to schools. And to be clear, I don't want to overstate it, no understate it. Like, this was not our expectation going into this budget process. We had, very real fear because of everything going on that we would be facing a diminished revenue. So we're pretty, I don't want to say happy, but we're relieved to a certain extent that, the general fund dollars are remaining flat and that we actually do have some more grant dollars that can be spent at schools. The traditional per pupil at this point is also being held flat, as well as the weights for schools. So schools will be experiencing relatively flat general fund dollars, but an increase in terms of the grant dollars that are available to them. So segueing here into enrollment. So we put up an enrollment comparison. If you remember, we did this at enrollment adjustment time to show the first two columns, which were the projected spring numbers last year at this time compared to the fall numbers, the actual enrollment numbers. And we've added in a third column for the new projected enrollment numbers that we're using for FY22. This has been one of the trickiest enrollment projections that we've ever had to do. Normally, enrollment projections are already complicated just because of, you know, the numbers involved and the data involved and the fact that it's a fairly interactive process. We don't just take the numbers in isolation, calculate, spit them out, and give it to schools. We actually do seek feedback from a number of different offices in central office, and then we seek feedback from school leaders and operators on their individual numbers. So they tell us, you know, what they think about the numbers that we've projected, if they think it should be increased or decreased. We take their feedback into consideration. There are circumstances where we incorporate it, there's circumstances when we don't. You know, there's circumstances where the feedback can conflict with what we're seeing or the data that we have. You know, there are a lot of instances where schools will ask for increases that, you know, particularly within the climate may not seem warranted. But this year, I think we actually had probably a larger number, and we'll have to pull the exact value, of schools who responded asking for decreases. Could be an indication that we maybe, you know, were over projecting, or it could just be a general sense of, you know, I guess, apprehension in terms of what fall enrollment adjustments may look like. But as I, you know, kind of said on the onset, this was one of the more complicated enrollment projection processes that we've had to do. There's a lot of thinking as to whether or not, you know, some of the trends that we see during COVID would remain, if there are things that are going to change when we go back to in-person, if there are things that are going to be impacted, you know, socially that will change how the enrollment numbers look. Where we ultimately ended up is somewhere similar to where we projected initially in the spring, which is a little higher than the fall actual numbers. The areas of the fall numbers that were, you know, worse than expected, pre-K being, you know, a huge one. But there are other areas where it actually worked out a little bit better than projected. So we sort of, you know, balanced the two, numerically carrying over some of the grade progression ratios and so forth. And with a lot of feedback from the central office staff and schools, you know, ended up on a number that is relatively close to last year's projected number. And it, at this point, may be slightly optimistic, but that's generally what we do in the spring. You know, if we have to err on the side, we'd rather slightly over project as opposed to under project, which gives us a lot more complications in the fall when we get to enrollment adjustments. So like I said, we always aim to try and get as close to where we think we'll end up. And historically, over the last like 3 years prior until this last year, we've ended up pretty close. So we're hoping to sort of get back to that next year, but there's just so many unknowns within, you know, the enrollment, you know, landscape that it really makes it precarious. So we'll see. This next slide is the charter funding formula comparison. So we had last year's initial charter funding formula and the final from the fall, the enrollment adjustments, where last year the charter started with 9111 as the per pupil number. The fall number went up, not because of a change in allocations, but because of the change in enrollment. Again, this was, the initial projection was sort of like pre-COVID. This was done last year, you know, last January and the prior December. So before we had, you know, closed down schools and we had really seen the impact of COVID-19. And then we saw in the fall that the enrollment numbers had changed, but not nearly as significantly as we, you know, thought it might have been impacted. So we're ending up again, like I said, somewhere fairly similar in enrollments for the projection for the upcoming year to where we were at the start last year. And that's impacted the charter per pupil. We're bringing it to 9234. I'll point out that, you know, that third to last line where it says the funds available for per pupil allocation, the actual dollars available for charters is up. So, you know, you can see an increase in the number in the dollars available, and what's impacting the per pupil itself is the amount of kids that it's being divided by, which is the district enrollment number. This is actually the last slide on the presentation. So if there's questions on anything that we've discussed so far, I'll be happy to take them now. can't hear Commissioner Roberts, but I think Commissioner Reed has his hand up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really tight presentation. Thank you very much. I guess first question relates to the enrollment funding model.
Yes, sir.
I guess first question is, what does the base mean? You have a base that's a lot lower than the aggregate number. What's the base mean? That's a slide. And I guess the other thing is, I keep asking this every time I see the numbers go down. Is the state going to hold us harmless in terms of the change, in terms of the number of students, where we get the same funding we got before? And I guess my third question relates to the charter formula for funding. Do you guys envision any tweaking or changing in that going forward based on just looking at math and looking at things that may not be covered in that model?
So
hopefully you got my questions.
Yep. So for question number one, in terms of the base, what we call the base in the Fair Student Funding is the number of kids who receive the base dollar amount. So that's $5,500 that I mentioned. If you recall, in the Fair Student Funding model, students receive funding in a number of different ways. Everyone gets the base funding to begin with. Certain students get funding based on poverty. Students get funding based on gifted and talented and other weights that get stacked on top of that. But that base number is everyone who gets the base per pupil, the 5,500. And the students who are excluded from that are students, of course, who are in the charters, and they're students in the alternative option schools who aren't funded on a per pupil basis as an overall allocation for the AOPs, which is 15.3 million or so. And students in the separate public day schools are also included, and some of the self-contained students. Everyone else that's not in that category gets that base dollar amount as a starting point. So that's what we refer to when we say the base on this slide. For your second question, we have been held harmless over the last, to varying extents over the last 3 years in terms of declining enrollment. And actually last year, the amount that we received in terms of the variance for the declining enrollment grant was much smaller than it had been the prior 2 years, because we had sort of like started to level out, just, sort of pre-COVID. We were going what we thought was like the bottom of that bell in terms of our enrollment and where we were going to start to flatten out, which is why last year we actually projected a slight increase in enrollment. But we had been held harmless on the state revenue side based on declining enrollment. Part of that is the declining enrollment grant. And also we had just a general hold harmless where in the governor's budget allocation, we would receive the amount that we received in the prior year plus like $100,000 in a non-descriptive hold harmless category. And that takes me back to one of the earlier points I mentioned with regards to the state revenue we received this year, general fund revenue being flat again this year, despite the fact that our enrollment had gone down again. So we did benefit from that. The third question with regards to the charter funding formula, we're very limited in terms of what we can do because of the state mandated formula. There are, and I guess, we're careful in terms of how we describe it as well, because there are some ongoing discussions with regards to the formula. One of the things that has sort of stood out this year, for us at least, is the ratio between the number of students we have in traditional schools and the number of students that we have in charters. So particularly right now, as we've just, sort of made an adjustment for a couple of charter schools that we've added, one of which is a fairly high enrollment school, and we've seen sort of an overall decrease in enrollment. You're seeing that ratio sort of, twitch slightly. So normally it was somewhere in the 17-18%. We're inching more towards like the 19-20% range. So we're seeing a larger proportion of our overall students in charter school now than we've had over the last, I think we looked at the last like 5 or 6 years. So this is the highest it's been. That does have a financial impact just because of how the students are funded separately. And, the dollars that come off the top essentially for charter students change the dollars that are available in the Fair Student Funding model for traditional students as well. So those are some of the things that we have to kind of look at, sort of the interplay between those, but we are fairly limited in terms of what we can do with regards to the actual formula, and some of the things that we have had leeway to do. We've already made those adjustments over the last few years.
Thank you. And you said the charter vis-a-vis traditional is the highest ratio it's ever been?
At least what we've looked at over the last, I think we looked at 6 years. It's the highest that we've seen so far. It did strike us. And again, this was a year where, we have varying amounts of change in a year with regards to like school closures and openings and so forth. So at this point, this particular cycle, there isn't an additional like traditional school, outside of grade movements and stuff. There's a new traditional school or a prospect of adding enrollment on the traditional side that we may see in another year. Whereas we did have like a school like Pimlico, for example, that was on the traditional side of the equation is now on the charter side of the equation and takes that enrollment with it. And then we had Clay Hill, which is a new charter that's starting up. So we did see a swing in some of those just because of like the movement of where they're placed. But just overall, it is an interesting, I guess, sort of like data point to see that percentage shift slightly.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Commissioner Reed, just on Courtney's point and your question, to give you the actual numbers rather than be coy, we went from 19.7% charter percentage to 20.6%, and as these things go, that was a pretty big increase. In previous years we saw, one, back to Courtney's point, is it's the highest percentage we've seen in the 6-year period that we looked at, and also the nearly 1 full percentage point increase, was a pretty big jump. Again, based on the merits of the schools in place. Like we don't have a percentage that we're shooting for, but this went from 19.7 to 20.6. And one other comment that I would add to Courtney's presentation, and he said it, but I feel like I want to connect it back to previous discussions that we, the finance office, have had with the board and with the public, because I think on a macro level it is a good development, and that was when Courtney pointed out that taken as a whole, the FY22 budget is not as bad as we feared. Again, we don't want to get qualitative because it's all about the numbers, but in previous discussions when we, the finance office, didn't have any information as to what the state might do or what the city might do, and looking around at other districts, we were quite concerned about FY22. People would use, especially informally, words like a cliff, that we might be going off a cliff, or, would use dire words to try to get across to our colleagues in the community what we were preparing for. So it wasn't that we were speaking out of turn. We were concerned that there might be some dire financial implications in 22, and we planned accordingly. And all things considered, the FY22 budget we got, which I think is, in one word, fairly well summed up with flat, or flattish if you want to get into some of the weeds, it's essentially flat, is a darn sight better than some of what we were afraid of. Now, we still have lots of challenges, just like we would in any year. If it weren't for COVID, I don't think anybody would be applauding at a flat budget, right? Because we're underfunded and have been historically. So a flat budget would make no one satisfied in our unique context. But against the thought of the dire FY22 cliff that we were all concerned about, it's better than we feared, and for that we're grateful. But Courtney said it all with numbers, and I just wanted to add that, hopefully not belaboring it.
Chief Dotery,
Yes, ma'am.
moment, I don't want to lose this momentum. So with the recent overturning of the Kerwin bill, could you just give us a little insight on what that could mean for city schools as we're in budget season right now?
Yes. Well, I'll start by, and Courtney, I encourage you to jump in. And also, speaking in plain English, very good news. Start with the very good news, right? To say it straightforwardly. It was until the override happened, it hadn't happened, and so people's speculation was just that. And so wonderfully, it was overridden. And we think what it will mean in subsequent years is finally getting more down payments against that gap that we feel every day that we've accumulated and getting closer to where we need to be, and not having to do, frankly, not to now make our flat budget seem more like we would have viewed it without COVID. But right now we're holding pat. We're trying to do things. We're patching things. We're moving from here to there again, as we're meant to do. But it's in a zero-sum game. It's if you take 6 units of something from this area, or if you want 6 units for something new, you got to take 6 units from something existing. And we've done a lot of that before, so there really aren't attractive candidates to cut from or move from in this environment. With Kerwin, with the promise of Kerwin now looking more like reality, we're going to have significant but not profligate. You know, they'll be meaningful, but certainly not extraordinary amounts of money with which to do, in this case, education recovery. That is now, as we start to pivot away from the worst parts of COVID and move back to the classroom, and we talk about recovery, we'll be able to apply significant 7, 8, 9-figure amounts to that. But Courtney, do you want to talk more about the timing of the Kerwin? Obviously not FY22, but beyond.
Well, yeah, that's precisely what I was just going to highlight. Like that, we're not going to see that impact as immediately. It's not going to show up in like extra money. It's going to show up this year in this budget cycle. Our best case scenario is for FY23. So I just wanted to call that out. But everything else, I think you said is, direct to the point.
But we do have something to look forward to. Thank goodness.
We do. Very good news indeed. Commissioner Roberts, thank you for bringing that in, because of course it would have been conspicuous by its absence that since our last discussion, wonderfully, the veto was overridden, and we're starting to move towards what we know we all need.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the presentation today.
You're welcome. Is that it for questions?
Commissioner Roberts.
McFadden.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Commissioner McFadden.
Listen, I know I'm not normal in this meeting, so please forgive. In listening to some principal feedback, one thing that I've noticed as a trend is several of our principals, Courtney, saying that they would like more autonomy in the creation of their school budgets and what it looks like for them. What do you think they mean when they say that? Based on what you presented to us in the presentation, and the collaboratives that happen, and the level of engagement that Chief Dowdy was just mentioning, what do you think principals mean by that? And I know that we're in the fair student funding model. I know that they are overtaxed with their responsibilities, certainly now more than probably ever. But what do you think they mean? Because it's several principals, at least in conversations with me, that have made mention of more autonomy in their school budget. And I'm thinking that, and then just putting a pin there, and then also thinking about how during the pandemic, a lot of their funds were locked, correct? They weren't able to do a lot of purchasing on their own. And so I'm just curious to hear what your perspective is around it.
Take this in a non-pandering way, that is an excellent question. So, and the reason why I say that is that it's an extremely complex one. Principals receive a lot of pressure from different directions with regards to budget building. They have their community members that they're held accountable from. They have their families, they have their kids, they have central office guidance that we give them. They have COMAR guidance that's provided. And ultimately, one of the biggest things, they have just the dollars that they have available. And they have to, within all of those parameters, sort of build a budget that doesn't just meet the needs, but exceeds everyone's expectations. So we have some principals who are like the ones that you mentioned, where it's just like, I want to be able to do what, is creative and is thoughtful and is outside the box thinking. And then they're hampered by the fact that we say, no, this doesn't meet COMAR regulations, or no, this doesn't meet district guidance, or no, this doesn't meet, check, this specific box. We also have, and sometimes it feels like a growing group of principals who make the alternate argument that they don't want to have to deal with some of the financial issues, and they would prefer to just focus on education issues and in-class issues, and not have to deal with the nitty-gritty of some of the dollars. But I think what you're hearing, and it's something that I have heard a number of times, is really sort of like a response to some of the added layers that we've been putting on year by year. And it's something that we've been cognizant of, and I think we want to find a better way to address. Every year we update budget guidance. We say you can buy such and such percent of an FTE, or this person can only have this role, or this job title can only perform. So we provide like layers and layers, and these sort of like stack on top of each other. A lot of these things, despite our best intentions, I think provide less options for principals instead of more. And a lot of that honestly is alleviated by just having more dollars available. So the fact that the dollars are so restricted and there is only so much to go around reduces the amount of options that principals have. So having more dollars available in a universe like we're talking about, hopefully what we're looking forward to next year, where there's more flexible general fund dollars, not just grant dollars, because a lot of the benefits that we've received in terms of dollars over the last few years have been grant related, which, come with a lot of strings attached as well, and even more reporting requirements as well. But having more flexible general fund dollars allows school leaders the ability to be more creative with their budgets, so they can check all the boxes and then still have the ability to sort of go above and beyond in terms of how they want to apply spending in their schools. Chief Perkins-Cohen, did you have something to add?
No, I think you hit all the right points, and I was just going to emphasize that last point, which is that I do think, what we've really seen over the last few years when we have been flat, to Chris's point earlier, is that, by the time most schools pay for their core staff and those obligations that Courtney identified are identified in the guidance, they don't have much left. There's not much left. We have squeezed these people to these schools, unfortunately, because of the financial situation. They are really squeezed. And so one example that we've seen, and one of the reasons why we did the centralized spending on some of the COVID cleaning responsibilities, is because, schools, understandably, when they've been in a very tight budget, they have prioritized classroom investments as opposed to some of the, how many custodians they've had. We have stretched so thin the amount our custodians and expanded beyond reasonable guidelines the number of square footage that a custodians expect to cover. Is just one example of spending tightness, and that's a result of very good intentions and I think the right intentions of principals in a difficult spending situation to focus on the classroom. But what we've seen, especially in this pandemic, is that maybe we've gone a little bit far where really some of the cleaning responsibilities, maybe we have to try to push that back. But the challenge is those types of decision making is really limited in the current budget, because principals really can just barely fund the basics. And there are not the kinds of flexibilities after that to do the kind of to really work with their school communities to think about what their school communities would want as extras or enrichment, or what interests their students. We don't have those kinds of resources for the last, I don't know. What do you think, Courtney or Chris, the last 5, 6 budgets, 7, long time.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I do understand it. And Commissioner Roberts, please, I don't mean to go too far in your meeting, but I'm just thinking with what we heard, and the amount of the weight of the responsibility currently that principals have, right? And that networks have in helping them, supporting them in creating these budgets for their school communities. I just think we should be mindful, the system should be mindful in ways of supporting them. And I know that has been happening, but be even more intentional about supporting them with a little bit more time and leeway to prep, to deal with it, because COVID hit us and none of us knew that it was coming, right? So next year it's going to be something else. God forbid it is as traumatic and as tragic, but there will always be something. And I think this is important. That's important. And then secondly, I think we really have to do what Dr. Bondima has been mentioning for quite some time, at least as long as I've been on the board, really supporting school leaders and principals in developing grant writing capacity within their individual school buildings. Yes, we can do it for the district, but do we develop principals and school leaders in a way where they're able to either seek out grants, or whether they're able to coach or develop someone on their own staff to do that, to kind of supplement some of these co-curricular resources and building material resource, all of that type of stuff I think is important. If we had that grant component blended in somehow into the training that school leaders have, and certainly as a district, I think we certainly need to do that.
Commissioner Reed and then Bondima, really quickly, 60 seconds or less.
Okay, Ronald, you can replace me in this committee anytime. Great points you made. And I guess I'd like to dovetail on what you said. I guess why I had my hand up. It's like more money means more prudence. So therefore, if we give the principals more money, it's really important for them to be more prudent in how they spend that money. The other side of the coin is they became principals not because they're financial engineers. They became principals because they were good instructors. So therefore, like you said, Ronald, I think it's incumbent upon district in some way to be a resource in terms of financial training, financial acumen, financial education, so they can be better stewards of the balance sheet, the income statement, the budget. So I think district can be a great resource in terms of training those guys and helping those guys, especially when they have more money. And that's the takeaway I have.
Commissioner Bondima?
I'll make this very brief. And thank you, Commissioner McFadden, for bringing that up. The whole time I've been on this board, I cannot understand why we have not taken some of our teachers, administrators in school and worked with them in developing small or any size grants, because it's being done all over the country. And it would really help to assist the budget in their school. And I'm going to keep saying it over and over again, and maybe it'll catch on at some point. But thank you for bringing it up, next Commissioner McFadden. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And thank you for a good presentation. Wonderful.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Mr. Gant, do we have anyone for public comment today?
No, we do not.
Thank you. So we will dedicate the remaining minutes of this meeting to our one procurement item.
Good afternoon. As Commissioner Roberts stated, there's one procurement item on the agenda today, and it's for Shield T3. And I believe that Cleo Hirsch is going to do a brief overview for the board members on this item.
Great.
Cleo.
Hi, good afternoon, commissioners. So I am going to quickly share some just 3 high-level slides on our testing plan with Shield T3. Can you see this screen?
Yeah.
Great. So I'm just going to go over this. This really sums up the bulk of the plan that's reflected in the board letter, and then happy to talk through any of the any questions you have, any of the detailed content that was included in those letters and sole source justifications, which I know came a little bit late. So thank you for your partnership in this. So we are working with, or we hope to work with, Shield T3, which is a company out of Illinois that provides saliva-based PCR testing for high schools. The lab will be set up in DC at Gallaudet University, so it will be a local lab, and it will be servicing testing needs for Baltimore City schools and a consortium of local universities in DC. So the lab and this technology will be specifically set up to service our consortium's testing needs. And what we will do is we will provide each individual in our high schools with saliva or spit that you place into a tube, which will be collected and sent to a central laboratory at Gallaudet for testing. And then principals will receive the test results for their school on a set schedule. So if you test on Mondays at one of our high schools, then you would get the results by a set time Tuesday morning, every Tuesday or every other Tuesday, depending on the cadence of testing. And then students and staff will have access to individual test results through an app and a web-based platform provided by the company shortly thereafter, after the principal accesses the test results and has time to implement the COVID response. So that's the high-level process of what will happen. Here is a picture of what this will really look like and feel like for schools. An individual will come into a space that's set up for testing in a high school. And so schools will have some autonomy over, is it the cafeteria? Do they have a mobile cart unit that goes classroom to classroom? But the protocol will always be the same, and there'll be a trained individual at each school who we train centrally who will be implementing this protocol. The participant will arrive, they will get a very small little, the tube looks big in the graphic, but it's a little tiny tube. They drool into the tube, it's screwed, it's put into a clear sealed bag. It is then scanned and associated with the student's name based on their ID, or the staff member's name based on the staff ID. And then it is put into a bag that is collected and taken immediately to the lab at the end of the day, where Shield T3 is able to process the test results in 6 to 12 hours, which is really one of the fastest turnaround times we have come across in just about anywhere. So it's a fantastic speed of result. And a little bit about why this approach and why Shield T3. So first of all, we have been reviewing this plan with experts across the country, as well as our local health advisory board. We've been in close communication with Rockefeller University, which has really been leading the national conversation around how to bring this screening testing, that's what the CDC is calling this type of testing. Again, testing everyone in the building, regardless of if they have symptoms or not, on a regular basis. That's called, now the official name is screening testing. And Rockefeller has really been leading the charge, along with the Biden transition team and now the administration, to stand this up. And we've been really lucky to have their consult and collaboration as we stand up this plan. As I mentioned, another reason why Shield T3 is a uniquely qualified vendor is that the results are so fast. One of the pieces of advice we got from experts that we were connected with through the Rockefeller Foundation was that you really want to pick a company that has local lab capacity. And we not only will have local lab capacity in DC, but the lab is specifically being stood up there for the consortium that we're a part of. So that really will help keep the results fast, even as the demand for this type of testing grows, because the lab is exclusive to our group. Another reason why we want to partner with Shield T3 is they have a saliva-based PCR methodology that's highly accurate. So the specificity is 99.8 to 99.9% with very few false positives. This saliva-based approach to testing is a little bit of a newer technology than the brain bruising Q-tip experience that many of us have had at the Baltimore Convention Center, which is also a very good and reliable test. But what's great about this saliva-based test is that they get so much DNA from the drool that the test is really reliable and able to be processed. So it's a really good development in the testing climate over the last year since this pandemic has started. Two other key reasons why Shield T3 is particularly appealing to us is that the test is self-administered, which reduces the risk of exposure to other folks in the school. Being able to self-administer the test, seal it, put it into a sealed bag, and then hand it over to the test coordinator, who will have the appropriate PPE on to register it, really just reduces that human-to-human contact, which is a huge benefit. And then lastly, the process is user-friendly. So as you saw from that graphic, it's a pretty simple process for the people giving the sample, and then it's a really simple process for folks to receive their results. The app that we're going to use and the web-based platform is being used by college students and many different big public universities. Shield T3 is already partnering with companies, and now they're moving into the K-12 space very quickly. And so the materials and tools are really user-friendly, and so we think we'll be able to jump in, and our community will be able to access their test results directly, which is very appealing. So that's high level where we're going. And there's a lot more information that are in the letters. So the board letter. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about this approach and strategy. and fill in any gaps and details that you're curious about.
Thank you so much for the brief overview, Cleo. I'd like to open the floor to my colleague, Commissioner Bondima.
Well, I'm looking at it from a scientific point of view, and I'm gonna I've already reviewed it, and I think it's a great idea. And I'm trying to. I'm having some problems with my computer.
Would you like me to come back to you, Commissioner Bondima?
Yeah, come back to me because I'm having some problems with it blanking in and out, and I didn't know if you could hear it. I'm already familiar with this process, and I've already had some conversation about it. Some of it I'd like to hold for public, but right now I'm just looking at it from the process, and I'm thinking about when we talk about incorporating it into the school and different things that could occur. So I'd rather hold my, we are sending out a lot of information to the community and the public in reference to it, in reference to the process, to the parents. We want to hold it.
We are in the process of developing a pretty comprehensive communication plan. We have already begun. We have already begun that work. There's a couple, we of course have to come to you, right? So there's a couple different time barriers on when we can get really specific with our broader community, because we don't want to get ahead of the school board approving this. And also the consortium that we're going to be a part of also is going to be doing a big press release. But I actually was just working with Director Andre Riley, our comms director, right before I jumped on this call. We are going to communicate as much as we can immediately, and then we're going to continue to communicate as rigorously as possible until testing begins, so that there's materials that are teacher friendly, parent friendly, student friendly. Obviously, principals is a huge audience we've already started working with, and so we're rolling that out as we go.
Yeah, thank you. The reason why I was hesitating is because I've been doing a little research, and I know it's being done in other locations, and it seems to be it seems to be very positive. Okay, so I'm just thinking about how we're going to put this into play here at the school, and bring in all our biotechnology people to run this. And that, that was what I was talking about before, because we're lucky that here, even though we're looking at it in labs, and I think the lab is DC. Did you say the lab? Okay, but we are really lucky here in Baltimore that we have one of the greatest, finest biotechnology process going on here. So we should, we have good information from the health department in different areas. So I think that the parents, once they start reading the handouts, the booklets and everything, I think that they'll get a better grasp. I think that just listening to it, when you talk about a saliva spit, some people say, oh no, what is it they're doing there? But it's one of the better ways. It is one of the safest and better ways to do a study, or not a study, but in order to determine what's going on. And we're taking all the greatest steps that we can to make sure our children are safe. And we're lucky that we're one of the few that's on the that's actually doing this research, or not. I keep saying research because I'm a researcher. I'm just saying we're lucky to be one of the districts that's actually putting this into play. So thank you.
Yeah, and can I just respond? So that's really helpful. And can I respond to your earlier question, Commissioner Bondima, because you're right about the timeline about engaging families. And I think that's, I mean, to your point, we are one of the earlier districts doing this comprehensively. And to Cleo's credit, like, we have moved this really, really fast. And so we have been moving this fast because we've heard from folks, and we feel too, we want to do everything we can to safeguard our staff and students when they return to school. So we're trying to get it in place as quickly as possible. Doing so means that we are moving very quickly. We're having to have a lot of conversations quickly. We have all these kind of chicken and the egg scenarios where, we got to bring it to you because obviously it's a major, so we want the board and the public to know it's coming and to be able to approve it. At the same time, we are doing focus groups right now I met with principals last week. I'm meeting with parents tomorrow. I'm meeting with teachers maybe tomorrow or the next day to try to get their input too, because there's a short-term need to procure this service, and then we're viewing this as long-term. I think that we will be in testing for a while. What that testing looks like, the frequency of it, the tool that we use could change over time as the virus changes and the community conditions change and the prevalence of vaccine change. So this is our initial cut to make sure that we're going to have something ready for schools, but we do need to keep engaging with parents and our schools to get their input, because over time, we're going to have to keep looking at this and reviewing it and adapting it to make sure that our current strategy reflects the current conditions and is the most effective strategy given, effective use of resources and the conditions we're trying to meet.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because one of the biggest concern is you'll have parents that may not understand what's going on, and say, oh, they're talking about science again. But right now, science is absolutely important to understand. And once we get the information out to them and they can ask questions and they can read and have some dialogue, I think that it'll be good for the mere fact that we're bringing our kids back, but also good for home, the community, and all of our stakeholders. So I think that I'm on track with it.
Just as a point of clarity, I wanted to add this particular procurement for this particular test is for adults. This is for our staff and for our teachers. This isn't for
right?
And for high school students.
And for high school students.
But
yeah, I understand that.
There will be a different strategy for elementary schools we'll come back to you with. We're still to the point of the fast timeline here. We're still talking to other partners. We're working talking to various companies and trying to make sure we get identify the test that we think is the best, easiest to use, most reliable, and most cost effective. So we're trying to still work on that before we bring you the other testing plan for the elementary.
It's still important for the parents because our high school students are still our kids. Yeah. So I consider them my children. So
Commissioner Bradman, we are over time, and I want to honor that space if someone does need to jump off of this call. I did see Chief Doherty and Commissioner Reed, so I do want to give them the opportunity to add their input before we do end the meeting. Commissioner.
Are you sure, Commissioner? I'll be brief. Thank you, Commissioner. At the time I raised my hand, it made more sense. It was more timely, but Ms. Hirsch's overview was excellent, of course, and it was excellent in and of itself. And also the facts were excellent. And there was one that I wanted to stick in there as she was going through the list of why this made sense. And the stars of the show, of course, are the self-test aspect and the 98.9 and all the things that she highlighted. So, but at the same time, I don't think she mentioned, and as the finance guy, I wanted to let the board members know, we're also getting a very nice, non-trivial cost reduction as a result of, from the cheap seats, kind of coming into the consortium at the right time. And we're not pinching pennies on stuff like this. This is no place to pinch pennies. And so the merits of this speak for themselves. But in addition to that, we have a considerable cost advantage by coming in, kind of drafting behind the earlier consortium members who spent a lot of real money to set things up and do things. And frankly, it's just, that bears mentioning as well. We're not letting the financial tail wag the dog, but it's one other thing for Ms. Hirsch's list of really good things about this is we're getting a very good deal on the money as well for the idiosyncratic reasons of how this unfolded. It just seems like the whole thing is just great staff work, and I wanted to add that money aspect as well. Okay. Thanks for letting me squeeze that in, Commissioner Reed and Commissioner Roberts.
Yeah, I guess my first point is about money. I think it's over time, it'll go down to like $25 per vial. So could you do pro forma numbers for us in terms of expectations? I'm assuming you're saying this is probably happening once a week or once every other week. So if we do it once a week or once every other week, for all the high school students, all the people in the buildings, how much would that cost us over time? And how we pay for it? That's my first point. And my second one is probably a big one for the narrative, as Commissioner Bondima talked about. This is what I think you guys wrote. Can detect the viruses up to 3 days earlier than antigens or rapid tests and quarantine before they have a chance to spread the virus.
Mhm.
So basically by doing this swab,
Mhm.
if I know 2 days later, I'm not a carrier of this virus if you find out about it early enough, is that right?
So basically, so let me answer the second question first and then go to the sort of numerical projections of what we think our testing needs will be. So the PCR test that we're using can detect the virus even before someone starts showing symptoms. So there's 2 days of what like incubation of the virus before you start showing symptoms, which is why the CDC says if I were to start getting COVID-like symptoms today, the contact tracing process would take back to everyone I've talked to for the last 48 hours and try to figure out who those people are so that we can ask them to quarantine because they've been close to somebody with a confirmed case. What's great about the PCR test is those 2 days before where I was actually contagious but felt fine, this test can tell us who those people are. But if you do an antigen test, it cannot. The technology is getting better and better with antigen, so that's why Allison pointed out, like, we have to see where the market goes, we have to see where the technology goes for the future. But for today, February 2021, this test allows us to detect those folks even before they start showing symptoms, which then reduces their ability to spread the virus. So that's why this screening testing is like a great supplemental service to the symptomatic testing that we already have, which we only know to request once someone starts feeling sick, right? And you've actually missed 48-hour window where you could have isolated that person. So that's the value add from like the science and reducing spread perspective. In terms of your question around suspected volume, I'll give you some numbers now, and then the numbers will get even more finite on Friday, which is our deadline for families to say that they want to opt in to high school starting on March 15th or March 12th. And then the one caveat to this is that families, we believe, will see what is happening in our schools and want to join in-person learning over time. And so the numbers won't necessarily be stagnant, but by next Tuesday, we will have a good starting point of like who will be in the building on March 15th when this strategy begins. Right now, based on estimates, and this is estimating again, we toggle between 20% and 50% of students opting in. Plus, we know how many staff we've compelled back. We think it will be about 4,500 to 5,000 staff and students who would be tested to start in mid-March, with, again, an expectation that as more grades come back, as more families feel confident in our processes and see what we're doing, that more families will opt in, thus increasing the amount of testing volume. So that would be the amount of folks that we would test either weekly or biweekly. And so now let me just answer that part of the question. Cadence. The CDC's new guidance that just came out on Friday states that you need to use the community conditions to determine how often testing is advised. So we are halfway, actually in Baltimore City, we are right now halfway between low and moderate transmission. One of our metrics is already in the low, and one of our metrics is in moderate. And so what they would recommend when you're there is that you test staff every week. But once you get to low, the CDC right now actually says you don't need to test students at all. So the reason we keep saying weekly or biweekly is because depending on where we get with the metrics, we might adjust the cadence. And it could change as, we meet with Dr. Duraza once a week, and it could change as much as her saying, listen, guys, we're in great shape, we're in the green, we're in low, the community conditions are going down, and that may indicate that it's time to scale back to once every other week, thus reducing the number of tests by half, right? So it's really hard to give you a concrete number, but we are tracking the numbers closely, and we have a plan with the companies to scale up and scale down based on the conditions and the CDC guidance.
Thank you.
And Cleo, this 9.5 million, that encompasses the most aggressive frequency
Yeah, basically to get there, you know, I said if we test, you know, everyone once a week through the whole spring who's back, and then we do 6 weeks of summer school, and somehow we're able to get like half the kids back for summer school, which who know, you know, like there's no way knowing that. And then also providing some level of testing for everybody in the fall. So this number does not encompass weekly testing in the fall, but I don't think many health experts think that will be required. Again, they lean towards testing staff more and scaling back students quite quickly based on metrics. So and that's new guidance that's 2 days old. So the guidance could further change once more school systems start doing this, and we get really good data on what this survey testing tells us about transmission and prevalence in schools. So we made I think a strong educated guess looking at our enrollment, looking at what we think testing demands will be, and that gets us to that 9.5 million.
Chief Dotary, or is that from earlier? I think that must be from earlier.
Thank you. I just unmuted myself and lowered my hand. Sorry, Commissioner.
It's okay. Are there any other questions from the commissioners? No? Thank you so much for going over time. We look forward to seeing this come before the full board on Tuesday, February the 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you for a great meeting.
Thank you. And we'll hope to have the plan for elementary testing then too. So we are working on that feverishly. So hopefully we'll be ready then too.
Wonderful. We look forward to
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you everyone for joining us for today's operations meeting. You will have a great day.
You also. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Commissioner.